Wednesday. I am excited to talk about today's or this week's topic because it's super near and dear to my heart. And it's one that I've worked with a ton in my own personal journey around creating a life I want to live. So I hope everybody's doing really well. A little bit of housekeeping. I want to remind everybody that the hashtag week 1, hashtag week 2, hashtag week 3 is the way that I'm trying to help organize all of the posts, so that way it's a little bit easier to manage. I know sometimes these groups can get really big. I also want to encourage you guys to make your own posts or to comment on each other's comments. Since this is like, we're hoping to create a community, we're hoping to create people to rely on even outside of the group's time period, so that way we have peers to talk to about how we're applying ACT and how we're thinking about BCBA self-identity, how we're thinking about how we work, right, and how we want to work, and to create some support structures for each other. The more we interact with each other, the more those things will evolve and create. And I know it's kind of uncomfortable, especially since we're all so busy and a lot of this content is super personal and it can be weird to confide in people. But that's also how bonds are made, right? And how people create those. So I don't know where your guys' interests are. That seemed like an interest that the group had and that we had going into it. So I just wanted to encourage that, just in case anybody was wanting to and might needed a little bit of a push in the direction of reaching out to people, creating your own comments or commenting on other people's. I've seen some and it makes me so happy and excited. And I think it also ties in with this week's content because sometimes perfectionism, right, can show up, or any of the types of imposter syndromes, which we're going to get into today, can show up with even talking with peers. Like, what if someone thinks that you don't know something? What if someone has a judgment about you, right? What if someone thinks about you and you don't have any control over that? What if they question if you're BCBA enough, right? And that goes into imposter syndrome as well. And it's one of the reasons why sometimes we desire connection, but then don't actually take steps in service of creating that connection. And so I would encourage you to evaluate if vulnerability might be a direction to step into in service of your values or goals. Again, I don't know all of your values and goals, especially if they're not kind of posted, right? But we can learn those and we can step in those and we can try it out. Plus, you can also delete it if you don't want to keep it out there if you decide that you didn't like it. Or you don't have to do it again if you decide that you don't like it. So it's all about playing and finding out and getting curious, right? And that is actually the antithesis of imposter syndrome and perfectionism and some of the other parts of imposter syndrome, is creating space to have mistakes, to have failures, and for those to be of service, and that they're not even bad, like they're opportunities, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and guess that you're like, right? Or you're like, oh yeah, okay, I know, but like, seriously? And that right there, right, is a habit. That is something that feeling is something that we've been shaped up to be able to have. Like, it's not inherent. It's not how every single person has to interact with opportunities, right? And we have the opportunity, right? I say opportunity, even though a lot of people will say like avoid, abort, get away from. Like, that's a bad, unsafe, scary situation to put yourself in a position to fail, to make a mistake, to be seen as not knowing, to be seen as learning, right? But truly, it is an opportunity to be able to reset the patterns of thinking and feeling in service of creating safety in the long term. Because the more times we practice doing the thing, right? We practice putting ourselves in a place of vulnerability. We practice putting ourselves in a place of potentially someone thinking we're an imposter, right? Or us thinking we're an imposter, but then getting curious about how it pans out in the end, gives us a chance to reframe that situation. So that was a really hot jump into, and not an intro at all. That was just like a straight up go. So hopefully you guys were ready for that. How is everyone doing today? How are we doing with the imposter syndrome material? How are we doing with the material so far? My goal of this group is to be of service, is to provide value, is to even like over deliver, so that way you guys feel supported. So if there's a thing that I'm not doing, if there's a thing that you think you would benefit from, probably another person is thinking the same thing, and I'd love to get that feedback to be able to dynamically adjust my strategy or my organization of the group to be able to be helpful. I've been getting some messages from people around some feedback, and I'm excited to start implementing that. I think I just answered the posts in the group. What were the other things? No, it really is just answering the posts in the group, because that's like priming the pump, right? Like it's journaling, right? But I think maybe Caitlin, before you popped on, or maybe, I don't know when, I was just encouraging people to make their own posts or comment on each other's. It's not something that I've told you to do overtly. So I think you did it. So good job. But it could be cool. So if you have a thought about imposter syndrome or a specific situation, or a personal applied way, or even just if you don't, it's not personal, it's just like hey, I was thinking about this, pop it up in the group, and then maybe we can talk about it. And maybe other people will do the same thing, and then it'll create a really nice, expansive way of thinking about it. Because I only have my perspective, right? Like I only have the way that I've thought about it and the way that I've conceptualized it. But when we have new examples, right? I have a lot of examples, but when I have your examples, sometimes they resonate more, and sometimes they even expand my awareness, and we can problem solve together. So that was one way of thinking. All right, so let's roll up the sleeves and jump into imposter syndrome today. I already kind of got started when I meant to be doing an introduction, but I've been chatting with one of my fabulous one-to-ones, and so I'm just on a roll. Like I'm in pocket right now. Lucy, getting back to engaging more in the group, and I am excited about this topic. Oh, I'm so glad. I am so glad, especially knowing, I can see why you'd be excited. I'm excited to talk about this too. So I popped a link in somebody's comment, I think it was Chloe's, about the 5 different types of imposter syndrome. Lucy, you might be more qualified to speak on this than I am, so feel free to add here. But there's one that we've talked about, which is perfectionism, right? So imposter syndrome like sits as a class of thinking, and then there's kind of like 5 subgroups underneath. I've seen pretty consistently the material says 5, and some Psychology Nice textbooks are reporting 5. I'm taking them at their word. Usually I truncate them all into perfectionism and imposter syndrome, but they're breaking them out more. And I think it's important, especially I was talking with one of my one-to-ones who's not in this group. She chose not to join, but she really identified with one of the other ones. And so I think it's important. So when we think about imposter syndrome, there's an inherent belief that we're thinking about our performance, right? Or our ability to perform. And then usually what goes along with it is the perception of other people in our performance, right? That other people are evaluating us. Sometimes people are only going against their own standard, but usually if we dig back far enough, that has to do with another person and their perception, and that has shaped the way that we think is most appropriate to perform. Okay? So if we take that just as truth for a moment, even if it doesn't resonate with you completely, with the two people who I've seen comment, I'm going to go ahead and guess that it does. But if you're watching another time and it's not resonating, just let's take it for a moment. That idea that this potentially came from someone else, right? The idea that we have to work harder. We have these inherent gifts and it means that we have to do something with them, or we're not enough, right? That accepting help is bad, or that making a mistake is bad, or it's unsafe to be someone who doesn't know everything, right? A lot of the times that thought is evolved from someone else's expectation and then us taking that on as a rule. Psychological rigidity. And in that space, it makes sense, right? We are social creatures. We benefit from a social structure. And I think everybody in here identifies as a woman, right? And either that or has been raised as a woman. And there's a certain amount of social conditioning that happens to women around being able to be helpers and being able to be considerate and being able to be thinking about others and how we impact others. That isn't necessarily put on the other sex, right? Like they're allowed to receive help and we're not. Yes, Caitlin, we call these daddy issues, or you do. That's totally it. And there's a really lovely book by the Nagowski sisters. I think it's on burnout, where they talk about this and they like label it human helper syndrome. Really, it's female social conditioning, right? For the majority of Earth. And so if we start allowing that to be true and we start noticing that we have these thoughts, that we're not enough, that we need to be doing more, that making mistakes is bad. I'm referencing my notes over here, so that's why I'm looking. Or having shame about not being able to get it right the first time, being seen as someone who is a novice, right? Or is still learning, or isn't considerate enough, isn't thoughtful enough, isn't enough, right? That's where these thoughts and feelings stem from. And because we're social people, right? Because we're, especially as women, conditioned to this to be appropriate, right? We start measuring ourselves up against that. And then those thoughts and feelings that we adopt from other people become our set of rules. Like we become pretty rule governed in how we operate. And that's really great for other people, but it's not always great for us. And it leads to some uncomfortable feelings and then some uncomfortable actions, which lead to burnout, like we'll get into next week. So how do we start thinking about reframing this, right? Well, part of the reason that I'm spending so much time with this idea that it kind of is social conditioning and it comes from other people is because that awareness about us thinking about how other people see us and then anticipating how other people might want us to respond in a way that's going to make them most comfortable. I call it mental gymnastics. And it separates us so much from like our values and our goals because we're in this kind of spiraling outward of awareness of other people that we get separated from the awareness to ourselves. And that can be okay because there are definitely times where that is of service to our own values. Everybody in here is a service provider of some level. And we probably get value from being of service to people. right? And so there are times where putting their needs in the perspective of our needs, even sometimes above our needs when appropriate, is good, right? It is of service. And so that can be intermittently reinforcing, right? For us to be able to start playing, what's the word I'm looking for? The gambling game, right? Like the poker, the slot machine, of getting the payoff of reinforcement, of feeling like we were enough, right? Of feeling like we did it perfectly. That like endorphin high that feels so good, or maybe it's dopamine or serotonin. I'm not always fantastic with my specific chemicals, but you know what I mean, right? Like that kick that our brain is going to give us that makes it feel automatically good to be able to do it perfectly, or to be able to be seen as smart, to be able to be seen as independent, to be able to be seen as enough, right? But at the same time, we have to start walking that balance, which it's hard because it's a moving target, right? Balance is always evolving with us and our relationship to our environment and our awareness of our goals and values. So it's just always kind of shifting around. So when we start making a rule that we put people ahead of ourselves, or that we can't make a mistake, or that we're just not enough and we have to find a way to measure up, it's not honoring balance, and it puts us into a place where we start getting drained, right? And it's separating us from our values because we're considering other people more than ourselves. And again, that's okay sometimes, right? It's all about finding where the balance is for you in your relationship to your environment, in your relationship to your values, in your relationship to your goals, which those people can fit into, but while still honoring you without losing you in that. So let's think about the different types of imposter syndrome. We've got perfectionist, which we've covered. It's that idea that you have to be perfect, that mistakes aren't safe. And then we've got superhuman. Okay, these are the people who feel like they can do it all, kind of the workaholic person, where you're gonna make it work no matter what. Then there's like the genius, who feels like they have these gifts kind of dropped in their lap, and if they don't get it, then it questions their self-identity and brings about shame, right? And then there's usually some guilt around things being easy when they're not easy for other people. There's two more that kind of go together for me. There's the soloist, aggressively independent, like I don't need any other person to help me, and if anyone helps me, then I'm a failure, kind of, right? Like help equals less than. And then the expert, right? Like I am always in a position of being an expert, and learning is unsafe, right? Because it questions my enoughness. They all kind of go together, which is why they get lumped under imposter syndrome. They overlap in a lot of ways, so don't necessarily get too bogged down in identifying with one or another. You probably have traits within all of them, and maybe you're dominant in one of those ones. And they don't really change the way that we would interact with it, but lately, one of my lovely one-to-one clients has been coming to some conclusions and awarenesses of traits that they have, and it's been a really powerful experience for her to just identify with those traits. And so I think being able to list them out and being able to see them can be really powerful. So if you take those words, right, those traits, adjectives, and go along about your day and notice how you might be embodying them, that's when we get to start questioning them, right? That's when we get into our self as context, which is one of the 6 ACT pillars, right? Being able to be aware of the process of thinking, which if you haven't yet, week 2 group chat had a really fantastic exercise to be able to start being aware of that and start noticing and work with your noticing. So go check that out if you haven't already. But the point is to just start drawing awareness, because the awareness leads to psychological flexibility, right? And so if you have these traits or these understandings, that brings you to start questioning if it's the way that you want to be responding, right? Because when we don't have awareness and we're just responding on autopilot or out of habit, we don't necessarily question them. And there's a lot of times in our day where we are on autopilot or acting out of habit, and our brain does that on purpose because it helps us get through our day. Okay, so it's not a bad function, but it is a function. And so when we draw awareness to that's happening, and then we draw awareness to these things that we're not 100% sure if they serve us all the time, then we get the opportunity, like I was maybe talking about in my jump-in introduction, to start creating shifts. And shifts is where we're going to tap into that clarity that we started at the beginning, which is why I structured it with like the life balance. What's your ideal situation first, right? There was some method to my madness and how I organized this group, even if there is a lot of madness still in the organization of it. So when we think about what it is that we want in life, right? Like in the getting started materials, I said 90 days, because that's kind of achievable within the grand scheme of this situation, right? But truly, you can kick that out, right? Like usually when I do that journaling for myself, I do it 1 or 2 years in advance, as well as 90 days. Like I do both. Because there are some things that feel achievable in 90 days, and there's some things that feel achievable in 2 years. That doesn't mean that it's true. A lot of the time, I cut myself short on the 90 days, and I can achieve that a lot faster. And I actually find my goals in the years one. But that's just me, and that's not everybody. So I can usually achieve like some big progress in my years ones in closer to like 6 months or 90 days. Because I'm dreaming big. I'm allowing myself to think further out. So if you need to do that, go for it. Like I've mentioned, I think a dozen times on a whole bunch of different places. I don't know if I've said it in here very many times, but I redo that exercise very frequently because, like I was mentioning, our goals are always evolving. Our relationship with our environment is always evolving, which shifts our priority, right? Which is going to shift how much energy, resources, time each one of our goals gets. And so if we evaluate them regularly and treat them like the moving target we are, with the awareness of that, then we shift the discomfort that comes with having an expectation. Okay? I'm not saying don't have an expectation. I'm just saying be holding it loosely, for a very act thing to say. Because when we have an expectation, then we hold on to it too tight, and then it opens us up to all of those things, the perfectionism things, the imposter syndrome things, rather than the opportunities that could exist there. So with some of the journaling in the group, right, I said, how does imposter syndrome impact your life, and how does it shape your present? Which is kind of the story that we were just talking about, right? Like this is something that was probably part of your social conditioning. It's probably something that comes from when you were a child, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to allow it to continue being the way that you have a relationship with whatever it is you're feeling perfectionism or imposter syndrome around. Probably work, maybe family, but whatever's true for you. Okay, so then we start thinking about the next one, which is, how is it holding you back from your ideal life? Which means that you have to be in contact with your ideal life. We have to have some clarity around that, right? Which is why I already said all that other stuff. So I want you to think about not just the tangible, achievable goals, which I know you're very good at because you are a behaviorist, right? But I want you to also think about the feelings that those give you, right? Like if you're thinking about having, let's say, evenings off and weekends off, and maybe like a half day Friday, and like that's a goal for you, what feeling does that give you? Right? Okay, because that's a tangible goal. That's something that we can absolutely reverse engineer and whatnot. But if we don't know the feeling that we're searching for, right? If we don't know what that's going to give you, then you could make it there and you could still be unhappy with it. That sucks. So the idea of like, okay, what does having a half day on Friday and really nice boundaries on the weekends and evenings, and maybe even mornings too, give me? And you're gonna have to go into thoughts and feelings there, and we're gonna have to start practicing giving you those, because you can reach your destination and still not access the reinforcement really if we're not in contact with the thoughts and feelings and what you're trying to get, right? So I hope that I'm using the right words to be able to see how this is ABA and mindfulness, right? Because the reinforcement is the feeling, right? It's an automatic reinforcement. The feeling of peace, the feel like not being rushed, right? So you can start by labeling what you don't want, and then you can reverse it to what you do want. Like, I don't want you to just stay in what you don't want. So if we say like, I don't want to be rushed. Okay, cool. Not being rushed is not a thing though, right? Like it's the absence of a thing. So what's the thing that's absent? And so that's what, with my one-to-one clients, I practice thinking about with the journaling in the ideal life, right? Like it's not just, and that's one of the things that I go into in my books soon. It's not just what you don't want, it's what you actually want. So if you don't want to be rushed, what are you going to feel? Peace, okay? If you want to be thinking about your priorities like movement or meditation or reading, right? You're not thinking about work, right? So if it's like, I don't want to do work all the time, well, what's the replacement behavior? What's the replacement feeling? What's the replacement thought? And that's where that clarity comes in of the first exercise, okay? And that's where it comes into the exercise that's probably every week's homework. And that's because it's such a powerful exercise. It's the one that we're going to do so frequently in life. And that's noticing where the thing exists already or where we could have an opportunity to. So once you get clear that it's peace, right? That's my example. That's always my example. I always want peace and calm. That doesn't have to be your example. Fill in the blank for what's true for you. Or better yet, tell me in the comments and then I can use it as an example. Okay, so to get you back to being able to answer that, right? We talked about how imposter syndrome and perfectionism is been shaped and how it's impacting your life, and then what is it holding you back from, and what do you want to replace it with? So you can fill that in there if you'd like. But then we're going to go into how am I experiencing that in my life already? So like I kind of break myself into like different parts. So I have like work Mallory, and then like hobby Mallory, and then I have like mom Mallory and friend Mallory. Some other people that I know, like they're painters or artists, and so we've talked about like that version of them. Or they're athletes, right? And we've talked about that version of them. With my husband, he helps people do football research, okay? Like for like Sports Illustrated and whatnot. Like he's a consultant for the authors or whatever to be able to be like technical. And so I call him Football Pat, right? Like his name's Patrick. And so we have like that version of him, right? And so these versions of ourselves, when we start breaking them down, probably have different strengths and weaknesses. And so when we start like, okay, mom Mallory isn't great at finding peace. but Craft Mallory is really great at finding peace and calm. So how does Craft Mallory go about something that's frustrating, overwhelming, exasperating, the way that maybe Mom Mallory is experiencing it? And what perspective does she have on it that I might be able to adopt in Mom Mallory, right? How are we experiencing the feeling that we want to be having already in our life, and how can we draw awareness to inviting more of that in? So like when I'm doing like a big craft project, for me, I don't really experience perfectionism there. I don't really experience any imposter syndrome because I have the expectation that I'm just learning something new and it's for fun and it doesn't matter more than just like for enjoyment, right? And so if I take that same mentality, even though it's hard, even though it's uncomfortable, and invite it into Mom Mallory, where I have a lot more pressure and a lot more fears, right? Because I'm supposed to be an expert in child development and behavior, right? And I have a 4.5-year-old who still doesn't want to poop in the potty, right? Okay. Then it means something about me. And then I've got extra pressure that I wouldn't necessarily have had in the exasperated, overwhelming part of like learning how to do a new crochet pattern. And yeah, they're not comparable, but the opportunity to be able to shift my perspective and my mindset to be able to invite in safety in failure, safety in not being the expert, right? Not being enough, and like that's okay, asking for help, what have you, is helpful and is comparable. Okay, Lucy, so I see that you gave me a wonderful example here. It shows up in situations when I go outside my comfort zone and I want to replace it with the feeling of more confidence and safety. Yes, 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 yes. And that's gonna always be the way that it shows up. Oh, dang it. I was playing with my pen and I got ink on my finger and now I got ink on my wall. Lame. So when we step outside of our comfort zone, right, we are inherently putting ourselves in a position to be triggered, especially if we have any of the imposter syndrome traits, right? If we have any perfectionism where we say like, if I don't get it right, it means something about me. If we have any of the like workaholic where now I'm gonna have all this pressure to work until I get it right. Right? And then that sucks because I won't get to take a break. These are inherent like underlying beliefs, right? So it's that we're drawing awareness to them as we push ourselves outside of our comfort zone. Not necessarily that we have that thought, right? But like that it's part of the like operating system of our brain, right? It's not like the window that's open on our phone. It's like the underlying, like this is how the workflow works, right? And so we have to draw awareness to that. Because when it operates in the back of our mind, then it gets to be a part of the workflow. And it impacts how we interact with our experience, right? So let's keep going into the examples. Like when you're pushing out of your comfort zone, it might make you question whether or not you're smart, you're the genius, you're the expert, right? It might make you ask for help. And if you don't think any of those things are safe, then stepping outside of your comfort zone is really scary, right? And if you've got years and years of, social conditioning and a history of reinforcement built around these things as being part of your operating system without like awareness to any of the ways that they might be detrimental and only awareness of the way that they like help you access that like gambling hit of dopamine, and like you just beat yourself up if you don't get that and it becomes the expectation, that's going to be really hard. It's going to be really uncomfortable and it's going to be really scary and it's going to make you question your confidence. But the reframe there, right, in all of those, each have their own reframe, and we'll go through them individually again, is that how can this be an opportunity to practice undoing that, right? And that all starts with the awareness that it exists at all. The awareness that it plays a role for you and that you don't want it to anymore. So when we start connecting the dots and we start seeing how our thoughts, our feelings, our actions are in support of maintaining the perfectionism or the imposter syndrome or any of the other ones underneath it, that's when we get to practice switching the way that we're thinking. And it's gonna be uncomfortable. That, even just that mental awareness is gonna access discomfort, right? And I think we've gone into this a little bit, where our brain likes to keep our neurochemistry the same, homeostatic, right? And so it might probably say like, no, this isn't safe, or no, people are going to think thoughts about you, or you're going to make a mistake and that's bad, red flag. You feel it in your body. It's really uncomfortable. However, when we say like, okay, I know that my brain is doing this thing and it's trying to keep me in the homeostasis of perfectionism. Thank you, brain. I know that that's been helpful to me in the past, but it's no longer helpful to me now. I'm reconditioning my brain. Thank you. I'm going to sneeze. Bless me. I'm reconditioning my brain to be this. And so when you have that thing that you want instead, we can practice reframing to it. So Lucy, you said that perfectionism is showing up. I'm assuming that means discomfort. That means like like your brain sending off red flags that this isn't okay. And you would rather feel confident and safe. So with safety, sometimes I go to like physical, actual, tangible, environmental safety, right? Look, I am in a building, right? Or I am in a safe environment. There are people here who I've had experiences with that have never put me in danger, physical danger, okay? And it is okay if someone asks me a question. That can be safe. A question is safe, right? It doesn't mean that they're attacking me. It doesn't mean that the repercussions of that, right? Like whether it be a student, for anyone who's a teacher, or an employer, or a family member, or a coworker, or a client, right? Just because they ask me a question doesn't mean they're questioning me. It doesn't mean that I need to be defensive. I can hold space to be open to my first thought in fear not being true, and dig a little bit deeper to be open to the opportunity that I can see this differently, right? I am physically clothed and I am physically fed, and I have a supporting family member at home, right? Or someone who I can rely upon and talk to. I am safe, right? And so that present moment awareness creates some safety for you to be able to step into some more of the discomfort, right? And then if you want to think about present moment awareness for confidence, right? Like if you're at work, right? Like you're being consulted, right? Or you're consulting someone. There's a safety in that relationship. And you can remind, I got a phone call. Hopefully that didn't interrupt the stream there. And so it's like when you get into that moment of like, this is danger, practicing present moment awareness, which is why we do some meditation. So that way when we're not triggered, we have a script to follow. Meditations or journaling or awareness, right? I like meditation version of it. We get triggered and we can root into the present moment, which is probably more safe than our brain is telling us. And so that's another part of the hexaflex, right? It's being able to give yourself what you need in that moment so that you can do the hard thing. That's why I spend so much time railing on self-care, because when we have a present moment that is safe and a body that is nourished, okay, with all of the Maslow's lower few hierarchy of needs taken care of, right? Like we're eating, we're drinking, we have like shelter and a knowing of where the next things are coming from. Maybe even like comfortable relationships and like things like that, right? Like, and we can draw attention to those. That's when the hard stuff becomes a little bit more safe too, right? Because we have a comfortable place to fall. We have a comfortable place to root into in the present moment, so that when we're doing something outside of our comfort zone and we're confronting perfectionism, we're confronting all of these thoughts that are so ingrained and they're so old and they're so socially relevant, right, in our minds, that switching them is scary. It's uncomfortable. It is for everyone, right? And so, present moment awareness, meditation practice, journaling practice, getting access to coaches or therapists, support structures, and practicing it when you're in the neutral place, right? That's how we can create safety, as well as the idea of having clarity, right? If we have clarity of where we're going and like how that's going to serve us, then it's not just discomfort for the sake of discomfort, right? It's discomfort in service of what we want. So both of those things have to be true. Well, you can tell me what needs to be true specifically, but usually both of those categories need to kind of be met in order for us to feel really okay about stepping into those places. Or at least they're places that we can be aware that will help us as we start making the switch, in addition to just general awareness that these processes are happening. All right, Lucy, I've got another comment here. I just remembered one saying I heard today. If you want to climb a mountain, you need to go through the valley, and it's connecting here. Yes, yes, so awesome. That's a perfect way of doing it. We're putting your valley together, and it's awesome. It's so cool. So, intention setting, tying it into act, yes. And so being aware of all of this stuff, right? Like the way that we've structured the group is to draw awareness to all of the components that we need, right? And if you go back and check out the week 2 Friday, like Zoom chat, which ended up just being me doing an exercise recording, that is a really good meditation exercise to being able to start holding space for all of those things to be true. And I'd be happy to do another meditation exercise in this group for you guys whenever you want. You tell me. Maybe that's a good way that we can start commenting on your own. Like, ask me for shit. I'm happy to do it. Because like I said, like providing value and helping you guys make the connections is the point of this for me. And so I really want to be able to deliver that. And the more we can communicate what we need, and the more we can create a community, the more those things will become apparent to us. So the exercise today, right, is 1, drawing awareness to how this is impacting your life now, how imposter syndrome or the things show up for you. Oh shoot, I was gonna go back through. Okay, so they have like a recommendation for each one. So like perfectionism is like not being okay with mistakes. So the reframe is making safety in mistakes, right? The superhuman is like, I can do it all. And so I'm going to, like the workaholic. And so the reframe is that taking a break is okay and safe and of service, right? For the genius, it's like that you just know everything and it's kind of easy. And so releasing guilt that it's easy, like it's okay that it's easy for you and it's hard for someone else. Yeah, and then that one, to me, expert and genius go together, but I'll leave them separate. And then the soloist, like being able to do everything on your own means that asking for help isn't safe, right? And so the reframe is that asking for help is okay, is safe. And then the expert is that you know everything. And so if you don't know everything, that you're not enough. right? But then making safety for asking for help, and that it doesn't question your enoughness, that you're enough already, right? So those are kind of the ones there. And what I was getting to in like the exercises is, how are you impacted by these traits, right? How, right? We're drawing awareness to where they came from, right? And making that okay, but then taking a responsibility for the idea that we can shift them too. The same way that they were created, they can be uncreated. The same way that you work with kiddos or clients around shaping new behaviors and undoing old behaviors can happen in the very same way with thoughts and feelings. And that's what we're going to do here. You're good at that. I know you are. And so we're just going to do it around thoughts and feelings. So whenever you notice, right, because it's not going to be as observable by other people, that imposter syndrome or perfectionism or any of the other traits that were underneath it are showing up for you, you're going to practice reframing them in the moment or reflectively. And of course, you're going to be able to make space for that to be safe, right? You're going to practice your self-care. You're going to practice giving yourself what you need to be true, right? You're going to practice drawing awareness to how you're already doing that in other parts of your life, right? Like my husband in the football pad, or like crafting Mallory isn't as overwhelmed. And so how can I channel her, right, in a place where I am more overwhelmed, and make it safe to ask for help, or to be frustrated. Like, it doesn't have to mean anything that I'm frustrated. It can be safe to just even feel my feelings, right? How are you already accessing what you want, right? And then how can we start reframing, either in the moment or at another time of the day? Maybe you need to set a reminder in your phone to practice switching, to practice reframing, to practice reflecting. The more we practice, the more our brain's going to make those neural pathways, right? And we're going to be able to take them more easily. The metaphor I like to use around neural pathways is roads. So if going straight to I'm not enough, work harder, is a freeway, right? Like it's the 405, it's the I-5. For me, that's what's here. But whatever your freeway is, right? Then the reframe of I can ask for help, or I can take a break, or I'm enough just because I am, is like a goat path in the woods. and the more that we walk that path, the bigger it's going to be. We can transform that goat path into the freeway, and we can let that freeway of I'm not enough, work harder, grow over and become a goat path, right? It just takes practice and repetitions. Repetitions. And as a behavior analyst, I know you know that, right? Table work, discrete trial training, that's what we're doing here, except we're doing it with thoughts and feelings. It's just not as easy to see it, right? Because you are the only one who can sense it, right? Other people might be able to see you doing it, right? But there's a lot of motivations in that. So you can get people to help you, like a coach or a therapist or whatnot, or a friend or a family member. Or you can practice journaling, right? And doing reflective stuff. But the more you draw awareness to it, which is what we did earlier in this training, is become awareness of it, make empathy for the fact that it exists, and still decide what we want, and being able to create movement and shifting in the direction of what we want. And so the more we practice it, the more we reflectively think about it, the more we practice switching, the more like the painful opportunities in your life where you're like, oh, I need to work harder, this is so bad, I'm upset, I'm uncomfortable, become opportunities to start creating comfort in those things. And then you can get to the place where, I'm at, not always, but it happens, and it's cool when it happens, where I notice like, oh, this is really uncomfortable, I'm really upset about this. Wait a minute, this is an up-leveling opportunity. Isn't that cool? I just found a place that hurts, and now I can heal it, even though the healing of it, right, is uncomfortable. It's like surgery, right? Instead of just overall hurt and like your body trying to heal it, we're gonna cut out that thing and we're gonna put in a new thing, right? Sew you up. It's gonna hurt. It's not gonna be comfortable. But if you hit it hard, right? And if you work on it for like, I don't know, 21 days, you're gonna start getting a workable path that's like a road. And then you can practice and build that up. And then your life allows you to make that the habit. Isn't that fucking cool? Excuse my language. But that's the point of all of these, is to just draw awareness and then practice the switching, right? And make comfort in the awareness. So I hope that made sense. What I'm trying to ask you to do here is just notice what's true for you. Maybe take some journaling of it, write some comments in of how you noticed it today, and then practice switching. Practice switching which into what you want. Notice what you don't want and how it's showing up for you, and how we can switch and reframe to the thing that we want. Comment below, give me the things that you're sticky about reframing, how you don't know how to reframe. One that I see a lot is that if I make time for myself, that it will take away from my clients and my coworkers. But my reframe to that would be, how is making time for yourself helping your clients and coworkers? It's a hard question to ask sometimes, but it's so transformative. And then I think I also gave reframes to all of those other ones, and you can go ahead and stick in what is true for you and apply it. And I'm always happy to help. So kick the things that you need help reframing in here. Or make it a comment of your own, and then we can all tackle it together. The more we communicate with each other, the more community we're going to have, and the more we'll be able to rely on each other when this container closes, right? Speaking of, I've got a few more surprises up my sleeve. I was just talking with someone today who was having trouble accessing some of the information in the group because of the organization of it, and I'm going to be dropping an extra treat, like I did the life balance course for free for everybody in here later in October. So be sure to stick around for that. I'm excited to being able to give that to you guys. So ask me questions, let me know what's going on. I will see you guys on Friday, and I will see you in the group every day, like whenever. So thank you guys. I love this group. I love being able to show up in here. I love that you guys let me talk about stuff that I care so much about, and allow it to be something that you take into your life. It's just phenomenal that I get to do this as my job. So thank you, and I will see you soon. Bye.